What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We are on to part 2 of the 04 Disco Resurrection. What we're going to be working on today is the teardown and inspection of the 4-liter that came out of my parts truck, and we're going to be discussing the process for installing these top hat sleeves. So those are the Darton sleeves that came from Turner Engineering in the UK. So if you guys, anybody watching this video, if you know a machine shop within, say, 2 hours of the Florida Panhandle, maybe even 4 hours, so Atlanta, Jacksonville, Mobile, anything like that, if you know of a machine shop that is capable of milling out the old sleeves and then milling the recess for the top hats, putting all that in, please leave it in the comments below. I'm having a hard time finding anywhere local that'll take this job on. Still kind of trying to do some research. My first two shops that I went to, they said no, they can't do it. So that's what I'm looking for, is a shop that's capable of milling the old sleeves out so I can get these new ones installed. That'll kind of be the first step after we get the motor tore down, right? We're going to be going through and we're going to be tearing it down, inspecting everything, seeing what I can use off this motor, see what other parts I got to gather from some of my other parts motors. Organization, super important, guys. So my thought process on this is I love freezer bags, gallon size, quart size, sharp marker for labeling everything, some little parts trays for individual little nuts and bolts. I picked up this set of 10 Aubrey in his straight pipe diesel. Picked up this set of 10 little plastic totes for 10 bucks from Walmart, so this will be great for organizing some smaller pieces and parts. And then another little bit bigger tote, this will be for putting the rotating assembly and stuff in. Still haven't decided if I'm doing the 4-liter pistons on the 4.6 rods. It basically builds a high compression 4.6 liter. Don't know if I'm going to do that yet, but I've already picked out what camshaft I'm going to use. My wife's saying hi. So we'll be going through all that process in this video. Guys, stay tuned, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Alright guys, so I already had the valve covers off a little while ago, so I was able to take a pretty good look inside of the motor. So the heads were off of this engine about 10,000 miles ago. I'll have to ask Wally, he knows for sure, because this used to be his truck. So the heads were off, they were redone at Dover Cylinder Head. This even got the little stamp on the back of the head saying that they're done at Dover. So all this stuff looks fairly good. It's fairly clean for a motor that has, you know, over 180,000 miles on it. You know, I gotta say this looks pretty good. We'll know for sure when we start getting into the rockers, you know, we get this all disassembled to see if any of this stuff is still serviceable. But we'll find out here shortly. All right, so next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna remove this lower intake manifold. It's just this handful of bolts along the side here. Get that off, and then we can start pulling all the valve train and stuff out. Alright, next step is get this valley pan off. What I'm going to do, so I don't drop a bunch of trash down inside the valley of the motor, I'm going to take my little brush, sweep this off, and then I'll blow it off the air compressor. Alright, so here we are looking at the inside of the motor. Again, it looks pretty good for having the higher mileage that it has on it. So something that we're going to look at a lot closer once we get this disassembled is on these blocks. As they get older, the castings got worse. Hi guys, so I got cut in here. It's like a day or two later. And I realized when I was editing this video, I didn't quite explain enough. So let's talk about the history of Land Rover V8. So in 1960, General Motors developed an all-aluminum 215 cubic inch V8 that they used in a couple of their cars. And then actually Oldsmobile used it too. I believe they even turbocharged it from the factory. It was called like the Jetfire or something. Around 1965, Land Rover, a Rover car company at the time, buys the rights to the Buick 215 V8. So they buy all the tooling and all of the schematics and all the stuff from General Motors, and they start producing their own version of the 2.5, or I'm sorry, the 215 V8 or the 3.5 liter V8, and it becomes known as the Rover V8. So from 1965 until 2004. Well, it's probably 2003 when they actually ended production. But Land Rover built their Rover V8, so the 3.5, the 3.9, the 4-liter, the 4.2, and the 4.6 was all built on all of the original same tooling that they had bought from General Motors, right? What they kept doing was they would increase the size a little bit, so it went from 3.5 to a 3.9, and then they needed a little bit more power. They upped it to a 4.0. They ended up doing a 4.2-liter version. Actually, TVR ended up built it up to a 5-liter version. They put in some of their sports cars, and a couple of, there's a whole lot more history. Neighbor driving by on his tractor now. So for a cul-de-sac, it's a busy little street. Land Rover being a very small company, they didn't have the money, the research and development time to develop a brand new engine. So from 1965 until 2003, they produced a flat tab push rod, old school, like an American V8. So as the engine kept going through all these upgrades and stuff, they're really struggling to try to get the engine to meet emissions, right? Like everybody else. Well, somehow Land Rover ended up stretching it out long enough so that all the way up until 2003, into the 2004 model year, they were able to get this old school flat tab push rod V8 to meet emissions. The way they did that was higher operating temperatures, okay? So they introduced secondary air injection into the engine, and getting the thing to run at higher operating temperatures made it run cleaner, right? But that's kind of the worst thing you could ever do for an aluminum V8, is to have it run hot. So the way the cooling system works on these trucks, they run 200, 205, 210 degrees all the time. And then you add in that their recommended coolant that they wanted you to use was GM, like the DexCool stuff, which they said was a lifetime coolant. Well, it turns out DexCool is very corrosive. So high operating temperatures and a corrosive coolant that they said you never really needed to change is where a lot of the issues come from on these Land Rover V8s. So people would just kind of neglect the cooling system. They would overheat. Well, you overheat an aluminum engine and it's pretty much toast, right? The other issue with corrosion is you'd have this real corrosive coolant in it, and as they increased displacement, they increased the bore diameter. Increasing bore diameter thinned out the aluminum between the cylinders and made the water jacket very, very small, or the distance between the cylinder and the water jacket very, very thin, which corrosion, thin aluminum, high temperatures, now you have the potential for cracked blocks. So a lot of these engines, the blocks became boat anchors because the blocks would crack. And at that point, you know, the engine's garbage. So that's kind of where the reputation for this being a bad engine came from, was all those different things. The other issue, and I'll show you on the old block that the original engine came out of my 03, I'm talking about casting and the tooling. So Land Rover built all these engines on the same casting, the same tooling, the same everything from 1965, right, all the way to 2003. That's one of the longest productions of a V8 engine, you know, really ever. I think maybe the small block Chevy went longer than that, but not by a whole lot, right? So I'm going to walk you over here to this other block, and we're going to talk about what to look for if you have a good block or not. If you really want to know if you have a good block, number one is history, right? How often was the coolant changed? How well was the engine taken care of? Was there any modifications done to the cooling system to help them run cooler? And was the engine ever overheated? If you check any of those boxes, that's probably the engine you want to avoid. And what we're looking for is right here where these lifters go down into the lifter pockets. We're looking to see how much they had to be machined because they're off center. So that's something, once we get this disassembled and get that really clean, we'll be able to see for sure. You can actually see right here where this one had to get machined quite a bit to get that lifter to go down in there. But what you don't want to see is a bunch of that machine marks all on one side of the motor. That means that the casting's off center. That means that the water jackets are going to be off center slightly, and that's how these can end up cracking the blocks. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to break these rocker arm bolts loose. What you don't want to do is just go ahead and loosen one at a time. We're going to break them loose in this pattern here and back them off like a half a turn at a time. That way the pressure that's on the valve springs from the push rods and the lifters and the cam isn't pushing up on the rocker shafts, because you can end up actually cracking the rocker shaft by doing that. So We'll start a little bit at a time. About a quarter turn. Okay. And once the bolt no longer contacts the rocker shaft, you're free to just loosen them up. All right, just repeat the same process on the passenger side head. So normally you'd want to keep all these push rods in order because they're kind of worn into the rocker, they're worn into the lifter, they're worn into the camshaft. This is all kind of one assembly. But this motor is going to be getting new cam, lifters, and push rods. So these are just going to get removed and set aside. So normally, like I said, you really take your time to make sure that you keep these in order, but I'm not going to be reusing them, so we're just going to remove the push rods. Alright, so just for inspection purposes, I'm going to pull each lifter and I'm going to look at the wear on the face of the lifter. That looks really good. Look at the wear on the side of the lifters. And they look damn good for being over 20 years old with almost 200,000 miles on it. So when everybody starts saying, you know, these Land Rover V8s, they're not reliable, well, yeah, there's a couple things on them that cause issues for sure. But I mean, look at the wear on that lifter after. Let me grab a rag. I mean, you look at the wear on that lifter after 180,000 miles. I mean, it's basically a mirror polish. I mean, you can see some wear on it, but there's no, you can't really feel any wear on it. And you look at the side of the lifter. I mean, there's many times this thing has gone up and down in its life. That lifter is in excellent condition. So this is telling me I'm really happy. I feel like I'm starting with a really good donor motor here. Everything's in working order, running, driving. Never been overheated. Like, this is gonna be a good motor to build. Alright, so next step is we're going to go ahead and get these cylinder heads off. These are going to be a bit of a bear getting these broke loose here on the engine stand. Should be able to get it done. They're 16mm bolts. Get a socket out and we'll start breaking head bolts. Loose. Breaking head bolts loose. Alright. A quick look inside the combustion chambers. Appear to be in pretty good condition. Don't see anything crazy going on there, so carry on. Alright, let's pull this head and see how she looks under here. Again, everything looks to be in pretty good working order in there. Look at the combustion chambers. They all look pretty good. Dumped a bunch of coolant down my shoe. Yes, it looks to be in good condition. Feels pretty good. We'll turn that one in a minute. Feels pretty good. Still see a decent amount of cross hatching in the cylinder walls, which is cool. Yeah, all that stuff looks to be good shape. Alright, now we've got top end disassembled. We're going to go ahead and rotate it over. Start working on getting the bottom end taken apart. Looking at the piston skirts here, obviously you can see they got a little bit of wear on them, but nothing crazy. A little look at the rod bearing after 180,000 miles of wear. And yep, we can start to see we're getting a little bit of copper showing right there. So she was getting towards the end of her service life, you know what I mean? But shoot, pretty good for 180,000 miles. Just about worn out. So yep, they were very well worn, but evenly worn. So nothing too terrifying there. And looking at the crankshaft, crank appears to be in really good shape. I don't see any scoring. I don't feel any ridges or anything on there. It all looks to be in pretty good shape so far. Alright, so now we got the rods out. I'll go ahead and get the crankshaft out. Bearings don't look horrible. Crank looks like it's in real good shape. Yeah, it's not bad for 180,000 miles, huh? Main bearings seem to be in pretty good shape. One thing that always concerns me when looking at this is how the end float is set. It's with this bearing, center main bearing here, and that actually looks to be in really good shape. Last motor I pulled apart, this was all ate up, so the crank had a bunch of end float. Yeah, it looks to be in real good shape. So the cam definitely has some wear on it. But dude, 180,000 miles. I think it's in pretty good shape. Pretty good shape. Alright, so here's my 4-liter block. When it comes to the Discoveries and Discovery 2s, if it's a 4-liter or 4.6 liter, it's the same block, all right? Same bore diameter. The only difference between a 4-liter and a 4.6 is the stroke, right? So as we look here into the lifter valley, you can see where there's no machine marks. That's just casting, right? Where the lifter guides go in. Except for on this block right here, this one little spot, you can see where there's a tiny little bit of machine work to get that lifter guide in there, right? So to me, this tells me that this block was cast good and center, right? And that makes the water jackets between the cylinders, those are going to be good. All this is just casting this, so that's exactly what you want to see, right? This is my 4.6 liter block out of my 03, the original block, and you can see where all these machine marks, where they had to machine the casting to get the lifter guides down into the lifter pockets. All right, and there's even one right here on this side. But that tells me, looking at this block, that the casting is slightly offset. So that tells me that, like, not that this is a bad block, it's probably fine, but I have this 4-liter block up here that is in good condition. That's the one I'm going to go ahead and rebuild, and I'll just keep this one as a spare in case I ever need to do something else with it. So like we discussed earlier in the video, when it comes to the history of the Land Rover V8, the old tooling and all that kind of stuff, one of the issues that the Land Rover V8 has is these cylinder sleeves, because they're pressed into this aluminum casting, they have a tendency sometimes to slip, right? Or they'll drop down into the cylinder. And in our world, we call that a slip sleeve or a drop cylinder sleeve. And they'll actually sometimes go so far that they actually contact the crank as the crank is rotating, and it'll give you the sound of like almost like an engine knock. So the fix for that is Turner Engineering over in the UK got up with Darton cylinder sleeves here in the United States, and they came up with this ductile iron top hat or flanged cylinder sleeve. So basically what I need to do is take this block to a machine shop, and they will mill out the old iron sleeve till it's like paper thin, and then remove it, and then they'll mill a recess into the deck of the block, and then this new flange liner will slip down into the block and sit flush with the top of the block. And then once you do that, you'll go through and mill the top of the block so everything's nice and flush. That way when you bolt the cylinder heads on, you're actually compressing the cylinder sleeve into the block with the head and the head gasket, and it creates a really good seal for the head gaskets, which kind of eliminates one of the issues you can have with the head gaskets on these. And then the bottom of the sleeve actually has an O-ring on it too, so it seals the bottom of the cylinder sleeve also, which is it's a great design. So if you ever hear anybody talking about a top hat sleeved Land Rover V8, this is what they're talking about. Pretty expensive modification due to this engine, but kind of, in my opinion, it's an important thing, right? So I just need to find the machine shop that's capable of doing this for me. It's not a super difficult task, but it's pretty specific. Turner Engineering has a very specific set of instructions with the tolerances and everything that needs to be done. So like I said earlier in the video, if you guys know of a machine shop in the southeast, then about 4 hours of Florida Panhandle, you know, all the way to maybe Atlanta, Jacksonville, Daytona, I don't know, there's got to be one here in Florida or South Georgia, South Alabama, you know, something like that. There's got to be somebody around here that can do this for a reasonable price. You know, I don't want to spend $1,500 on this process, because it's not that involved, but I just need a machine shop that's capable of doing it. So that's the next step for this engine. I'll get it degreased pretty good before I take it somewhere, and then we'll get them to install these cylinder sleeves, and then we can finally start putting this engine back together. With that being said, guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video.